does that even mean? Okay, I don't think they even talk about the story. It's just about italics. The whole review is just about italics. I don't know what to say to you, man. A book would have to be outright offensive for me to rate it 1 star. For me, 1 star means it's just the worst thing ever. To the point where I don't think I've ever reviewed a book 1 star before, because I've not read anything that I think is that bad. Even books I really didn't enjoy, I can see why others would enjoy it. However, some of you are crazy and just dish out 1 star reviews for the most minimal things ever. And it's an interesting choice. So today I thought we would look at some of the 1 star reviews for some of my favorite books of all time. Now, of course, everyone's allowed an opinion, everyone's allowed to 1 star every book they read if they really wanted to. However, I do think it's very entertaining to read some of the reasons why you would give a book 1 star. And I always find these types of videos really entertaining when Murphy Napier does them. So we're gonna do some reviews. First up, we've got Lord of the Rings, the grandfather of fantasy himself. Now, I completely understand why people might not jibe with this book. However, to 1 star, the grandfather of fantasy himself is a questionable choice. Okay, no one can say that I didn't give Lord of the Rings a good try. I read The Hobbit, it was okay. Watched the first Hobbit movie, again okay. Tried to watch the first Lord of the Rings movie 3 times, but fell asleep each time and just read Fellowship of the Ring. What? The movies? The movies are so good! Okay, moving on. It's just not my thing. And even though it's okay for it to not be my thing, it's one of those things where if you don't like it, people are all up in arms saying, what do you mean? It's a classic. If you don't like this, then you don't like true literature, fantasy, etc. Don't you know a good film when you see it? And similar pretentiousness. I completely agree with that comment, and it's really unfair. If you don't like something, that doesn't make you any less of a reader in any way, even if it's Lord of the Rings. Fantasy is such a large and diverse genre now that it's so, you can't just say if you don't like this, you're not a fantasy fan. It just doesn't work like that. And I do think sometimes with the classics, you can get those pretentious readers who do say if you don't like this, then you're not a reader, which is wrong. Read what you like. You do not need to read X, Y, or Z to be a reader. Not that my friends would say this, but just know I tried, and I tried damn hard. But I'm not going to be a sheeple, and I'm not going to lie. Why didn't I like the book specifically? For the same reason I didn't like the movie. It drags so very much. I found everything to be too detailed, and wasn't terribly interested in the events or characters. For the record, I don't hate the characters, it's just that nothing draws me to them, and it doesn't help that I don't really care what they're doing, or care for how long it is taking. I do respect Tolkien for his contribution to the fantasy genre and literature, but that respect does not necessarily lead to any enjoyment. Now, I did say at the start, I can see why people wouldn't like Lord of the Rings, and the dragging is definitely the reason I would think most readers would not jibe with the book. It is very slow paced, and it is very meandering, and Tolkien does like to get overly descriptive about the landscape and different parts of the lore, and if that's not your thing, then yeah, it's not going to work at all. However, what did surprise me was that it was the same reason this person didn't like the movies. I never thought the movies dragged. I thought the movies are very much action blockbuster, really cut the pacing and make it very neat and very, not fast-paced per se, because they are very long movies, but it is so much more, you're propelled through the narrative, whereas in the books it can be a bit... That's another thing I do hear a lot is about the characterization in Lord of the Rings. I watched the movies first, and I don't know if that swayed how I feel about the characters, because I had certain images and characterizations in my head, and despite the fact that the books are different, you can sort of bring across parts, especially the visuals and such, and the actors to the book when you're reading it. I'd be really interested to go back in time and have read the book first. This is just making me want to reread Lord of the Rings. Before then, a quick word from our sponsor. And this video is sponsored by UPDF. UPDF is your one-stop shop for all your PDFing needs. You can do all the classic things like read, annotate, sign, encrypt. And with UPDF's one license, you can work on 4 devices simultaneously across Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. However, the one feature that really interested me, and I think it would interest you as a reader, and this includes the scan to PDF feature, which is really helpful for if you are a reviewer, if you want to just snag a page and leave some notes on the book that you're reading, which is really useful for people like me who are doing reviews or videos on said book. It means I can just whip out my phone, open up the app, open up the scan to PDF, scan the page I'm on, and then I can leave notes on that page using the notes feature. Another thing that's really useful is if you are reading something like Empire of the Vampire, which I highly recommend, there are some French phrases inside this book, and one of the things that you can do in UPDF is translate over 38 different languages. So no more will you be reading Empire of the Vampire and thinking, no idea what that says. Also, if you are a student, you can also use the embedded AI features to summarize information and create mind maps from the PDFs that you have imported. And you can also check out UPDF Pro with an exclusive discount by checking out the link in the description. And thank you very much UPDF for sponsoring today's video. I hate this book. I got it 3 years ago, but never got around to reading it because it seemed so boring. But since everyone loves it so much, I decided to read it. This was awful. The whole book could have been 250 pages shorter if the author had removed the stupid history references, which are of no use, and if he had just written, they had walked till they reached so-and-so place. The characters kept walking and camping for 95% of the book. Walk, 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 eat, sleep, walk, 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 battle, then walk, 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 walk. Awful. Hated it. Oh, that's really funny. They're not wrong. It's a lot of walking. A lot. I will say the one thing that's interesting here is if the author had removed stupid history references, and this is a lot to do with the lore in Lord of the Rings. I mean, Tolkien is really known for his world and his lore and how they are interweaved into this larger world with a massive history and languages and different events in history, which is why Lord of the Rings works for so many readers, because it has so much depth to it and so much meat to really get your teeth into it as a fantasy reader. There's so much to kind of veer off and learn more about from the main story, especially when you get into things like the Silmarillion, the children of Húrin, and all these sort of side stories. And fantasy readers who really want a lot of depth and a lot of lore in their stories will love that. But of course, those who just want sort of a more self-contained story or something that's a wee bit more trim narratively might not really like all these added details that are not necessarily directly related to the plot in this book, even if they are technically related if you go via history and stories and all the plot lines. Readers are not going to know that from just reading this one story. Especially when you get into the poems and the songs, it's definitely a point of contention for those who read it. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people are kind of in the middle. This is a long one, so I'm just going to read the start of it, but this really made me laugh. I really like this review. First off, I should admit that I am Hobbit intolerant. I can't stand those little suckers. Their gross feet and their obnoxiously idyllic shire. They are romanticized, hairy-footed little people, best described as simple-minded reactionary caricatures. The elves are not much better with their magicalness and aloofness. I like it. But at least they don't have gross feet. They're just bigots. Then there are all those epic man dudes doing long-winded yet epic man dude things at an excruciating pace, which Tolkien obviously mistook for a mythical feel and epic scale. I'm completely lost with this one, to be perfectly honest, but I thought it was really funny. First, I should admit I'm Hobbit intolerant. They're just really chilled out people who live in basically the English countryside and smoke pipe weed and drink ale and just chill and farm. I don't understand the hate. I don't understand it at all. They're the most... I guess some of them are kind of grumpy, but in man dudes doing long-winded yet epic man dude things. What does that even mean? I think this is the first time I've heard Lord of the Rings have the problem with having too many man dudes doing too many man dude things. Oh, I'm so lost. Next up, I want to look at Empire of the Vampire. Now, this one, I'm not surprised there's 1-star reviews. Personally, I loved it, but I can see why others would dislike it greatly. So I'm looking forward to checking out some of the 1-star reviews. No, just no, absolutely not. I'm not sure what made me pick up another J. Kristoff book after the dumpster fire that was Nevernight. I need to stop believing the hype, but I get most of my exercise from jumping on bandwagons, so I hated everything about this book. So that's a good start. The boring plot, the pretentious writing, the angsty main character Gabriel, at least Edward Cullen sparkles. No, come on. And of course, the female characters. Kristoff liberally uses women in refrigerator tropes just to make Gabriel extra broody, as if killing female main characters is a prerequisite male character's character development. The best decision I made in 2021 is DNFing this book at 15%. In hindsight, the best decision would have been to not start in the first place, but it's too late for that. That's brutal. Boring plot. This one surprised me. Well, I guess if you stopped at 15%, there isn't a lot that happens from the wide scope of the story. So I think it's really hard to judge a plot on 15%. You can say the openings may be slow or boring, but I think it's hard to judge a plot on that because, in my opinion, the plot to Empire of the Vampire is one of the best parts. I'm very much a character reader, however, the plot and sort of the world building is really what drew me into this story, this massive world of these vampires trying to take over, these sort of zombie-like vampires that roam through the land, but also these vampire families that are very smart, that are sort of able to control these younger vampires, and the main character becoming a vampire hunter, and how that all came about. I thought it was a fascinating opening and sort of story to get into. The pretentious writing, J. Kristoff is very purple in his prose. The way he writes, especially with Nevernight, I know that was mentioned in this review as well. The prose in Nevernight is extremely purple and flowery and very metaphorical, and in my opinion, it can be a little over the top. However, Empire of the Vampire really rolls back on that, in my opinion, and compared to Nevernight, it's still very purple. And I would even go to say that Empire of the Vampire is one of the most beautifully written books I have ever read. However, again, prose style is something that's very individual, so if someone can... I can see why someone could pick it up and think it's very pretentious or over the top. However, if you think that's over the top, don't read Nevernight because it's even more over the top than Empire of the Vampire. Angsty main character, yeah, he is... There's no defending that. He definitely is an angsty main character. However, at least Edward Cullen sparkles. That's not a good thing, though. We don't want them to sparkle. The best decision would have been not to start it in the first place. It's such a brutal way to finish a review. I'm extremely disappointed with how this turned out to be. It was very promising for like the first 100 pages, but then downhill from there. This story has so much potential to be absolutely mind-blowing, if not for the extreme excess use of vulgarity in situations that doesn't require it, the complete all over the place pace, I'm guessing that means pacing, and the force down your throat social and religious point of views. It should be points of view. Listen, if I'm allowed to be called out on it every time I mess up, then I'm allowed to call out others, okay? However, I can definitely see the complaints in this review, especially with the excessive use of vulgarity. There's a lot of swearing and such in this. However, that's very much J. Kristoff's style. I do think that that's just how he writes, and personally, it doesn't bother me. It is over the top, but I think it's meant to be over the top because of that's how the characters use it. I mean, we all know those types of people in real life that use it way more than it needs to be, so I don't think necessarily it's a bad thing to have a book that uses it more than it probably should if it relates to the character and the tone and fits well. And given Gabriel as a character, it makes complete sense that he swears a lot. The pacing I kind of get. That's probably one complaint that I would have with Empire of the Vampire. I don't think it's got poor pacing, but what it does is it has a framing narrative where you're following Gabriel telling his story. And one thing he likes to do is he tells part of the story in part of the timeline and then jumps to a different part of the timeline. So you've kind of got a three-pronged story. You've got modern day Gabriel telling the story, you've got a very young Gabriel, and then you've got a slightly older Gabriel. And you do kind of jump between the three, which can make some of the pacing a little jarring and it feels very strange and very stop and start in some ways. So valid, completely valid, get that. For me, it felt like the voice of the author is too much present and strong that it was impossible to connect with any of the characters. And I felt like I'm being forced to think and react in a certain way to understand what's going on or even relate to it. Now, the first part of that, completely agree. Jay Kristoff, you can tell very quickly that you're reading a Jay Kristoff book. He has a way of writing, a tone with the way he writes his characters, even his prose style. This just so Jay Kristoff. But that's partly what I love about him, is that you know you're reading a Jay Kristoff book, and I love his style that he just carries through his different work. But again, it is very stylized in the way that he writes with the prose and also the narrative and the character work. So yeah, I can see why some people would not necessarily like that. Again, individual thing, very personal taste. The second part of that, I feel like I'm being forced to think and react in a certain way. I personally didn't find that at all. So I don't know where that's coming from. But what disappointed me the most is that the essence of the story is totally ripped off. That ending scene. If you've read and loved Name of the Wind, you'll know why it pisses me off. I understand being inspired by others' work, and I get it 100%, but there's a difference between influence and downright copying. I have read Name of the Wind, and I love it, and I have no idea what this means at all. I'm trying to think so hard about the ending. And how is it the same as Name of the Wind? I have no idea. I have not got a clue. Maybe I need to reread both and compare and contrast. They both have framing narratives. Again, it's someone telling their story, but I can't think. This person thinks it's being completely ripped off. I don't know. Maybe I'm well off and I've just forgotten, but I don't remember this being even similar, much less a complete rip-off. Okay, I've clearly been ranting for far too long because we've only done 2 books, but we'll do one more. Let's look at The Sword of Kaigen. Now, this is such a good book. It's not easy for me to DNF a book. Of books that I started with earnest expectations, there are only 2 that I abandoned in recent memory. There were others I should have given up on. But when I start a book, it's for a reason, and I almost always see it through to the end, even if I'm not really enjoying it. So for me to give up on this book at 16%, an epic fantasy with high praises sung far and wide, including many of my Goodread friends, and a coveted SPFBO winner, something must have gone, seriously, awry. What was the deal breaker? What egregious sin did this book commit? It was the italics. It's such a dramatic opening. The turning point is italics. Okay, I hope the rest of this review will illustrate the problem. Oh no, it's all in italics. Why is there so many damn italics? The author chose to use italics whenever a character spoke in Kaigenwa, the imperial standard. The alternative is Shirojima dialect, which is not in italics. Little context, there's multiple languages in this book. One of them is done in italics so you can tell that they are speaking that language instead of the other one. This becomes a problem quickly because Kaigenwa is spoken a lot. For the life of me, I can't possibly see any possible reason why the author felt the need to delineate the two dialects in this way. Because at no point does it matter what goddamn language they were speaking. Everyone there understands both, so it's not like there's a need for some character to use a different language for secrecy. This is really funny because this isn't even a point I even thought about when I read the book. It is true. There are two languages. It doesn't really matter that much. There is a character that comes to the island that doesn't speak one language particularly well. So it does kind of harken on that fact at the start of the book. But it's true, there isn't a whole lot of reason to delineate the two differences. I have no idea, but I just thought this review was really funny that they were that bothered about the italics. But I'm opening to random pages and I don't see any italics on this page at all. On either page, there's none. I didn't think there was that much. There's some. I'm not sure I've ever seen a 1-star review because someone used italics too much. Did they say anything about the story? I don't think they even talk about the story. It's just about italics. The whole review is just about italics. It's all about the italics. It drives me nuts because most of the reviews of this book are overwhelmingly positive, stunning, tragic, raw and beautiful. The finest example of standalone fantasy fiction I have read in years. Devastatingly good. Why aren't the italics a deal breaker for more people? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I don't know what to say to you, man. Let me know in the comments below, has a book formatting in any sort of way ever bothered you enough to affect your final rating? I am mightily curious now. I really need to know, is this a common thing? Do people really not like extra italics or formatting differences? The person should have swapped over to the audiobook. That would have been the answer. But thank you very much for watching.